I wonder if I can add this, make a Facebook right now also. I'm going to try. We're going to go
Breaker,
now.
breaker, 19. I'm not familiar with the lingo. The 5x5. I don't know what that means.
Breaker,
I have no
breaker.
idea. You guys say that
It
every
means
once
you
in a while. I'm
sound
like, okay.
and look. Means you sound and look great.
I think my only...
Oh, thank you. You could just say that. It'd be a better compliment.
I think my only awareness of trucker lingo was from, like, what were the movies with the bandit, whatever? Smokey and the Bandit?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm dating myself here.
That's a
Oh
big
my
10-4.
That's right.
Mine all come from C.W. McCall, which I understand nobody's ever heard of, but he's got some great trucker songs, including like the best disco trucker song ever. So.
And we're live! Hey, everybody out there. I just want to let you know that if you're starting the show with us on YouTube, on Facebook, on twis.org/live right now, what you are seeing is the live broadcast of the This Week in Science podcast. If you want the edited, pretty version, then you'll have to subscribe to the podcast. But I think we're about ready to start this show. Big thumbs up, everybody. In 3, 2, this is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 775, recorded on Wednesday, May 27th, 2020. To health with social distance. I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we will fill your head with skillful bees, translucent frogs, and some sociality. But first...
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. Some information is not universal. When we use a number, we can agree on what it is. 3 is 3. There are 3 hosts on this show. That is a fact. We can agree on that. Whether 3 is too many, just the right number, maybe not enough hosts, we may or may not agree upon. An important thing is that, to remember, is that in today's media world, the things that we are used to as being facts, like a number being a number, are often less reported than opinions. And actually, those opinions are usually manufactured to influence people towards some sort of an agenda. Because of this, you have to understand there is a difference between the information you may be getting and the information others may be getting when it comes to, things like COVID-19. What are the right practices to prevent its pandemic spread? Global warming is also on that list, how democracy works, capitalist economies, healthcare, what that should look like, the value of education, the value of science, whether or not scientists are part of a corrupt cabal of deep state liberal fascists who are duping the American people into staying at home over this made-up pandemic so that only poor, godless, liberal, elite immigrants can take advantage of the reverse engineered alien technology that it has been harnessed to make the best fruit smoothies the history of the world has ever seen. In this time of pandemic problems, let us not forget the one thing we face that is worse than this pandemic itself: human ignorance. With all the other problems the world may face, ignorance and the ease with, and seemingly increasingly, number of Americans who will believe absolute nonsense is perhaps our greatest danger. It's one thing when people are convinced to act against their own best interests. This we kind of are used to. It's quite another, though, when they act against everyone else's. We must find a way to put an end to human ignorance before human ignorance puts an end to This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science.
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back, bringing you all the science that we wanted to bring to the show tonight. And unlike some other big historical events today, we are not postponed. That's right.
Wow.
Our show is go for launch, ready for liftoff. Yeah, if you haven't already heard, the NASA SpaceX crewed launch was scrubbed today at about 16 minutes before launch due to weather. That's unfortunate, but everyone is safe, which is the most important part of this. And the plan is to try again on Saturday, so you can watch it this weekend online if you are not in the area of the launch. Our fingers are crossed for everyone involved in this historic event.
And remember, bad weather is just the Earth's way of saying, don't leave.
Stay here. We'll miss you. That's right.
Stay
Stick
home.
around a while. Stay home.
Stay with me.
Stay
Do you
grounded.
think there's a pandemic down here? Just don't worry about it. Just hang out.
Yeah. All right. On the show tonight, science news that I brought, I've got missing matter and Neanderthal genes for better birth. And we have an interview coming up to discuss the interaction of social interactions and our health. What do you have for us, Justin?
I've got skillful bees, stretchable words, and what didn't kill the dinosaurs.
What didn't kill them? Do we know?
A lot of things.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well,
Banana
I
cream
can
pie,
narrow
I
it
assume,
down
is on that
now.
list.
I can
Yeah.
narrow it down now. But it's not the 65 million year ago. It's the like 215 million year ago.
Oh, much longer
Extinction
ago.
event has been called like it's sort of getting an interesting update.
All right. And Blair, what is in the animal corner?
Oh, I have some frogs. I have family matters, and I also have some narwhal whispers.
Whispering
Narwhal
narwhals.
whispering.
Whispering narwhals. That's a good name for a jazz band.
Yeah. Soft jazz. Soft.
Soft
Yeah.
jazz. Exactly. With a horn section. As we jump into the show here, I want to remind you that subscribing to the TWIS podcast on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube or Facebook, is going to bring you TWIS each and every time a new episode is published. It really will. You look for This Week in Science if that's what you'd like, or you can visit twis.org to find more information. And now it's time for our interview. I would love to introduce our guest. Dr. Jenny Tung is an associate professor in the departments of evolutionary anthropology and biology at Duke University and a faculty associate of the Duke University Population Research Institute. Her lab studies interactions between genes and behavior and the relationship between social behavior and health. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks.
It's great to have you here. And I would love to know, just to start out, how did you get interested in your field of study? What led you down the path to primates and social interactions?
Right. Well, basically my story is I took a class, as an undergrad in college. I happened to stumble into this sort of interdisciplinary program on forging social ideals, my first semester of college. And that ended up being something entirely unexpected, including a course taught by a woman who'd spent a lot of time out in Tanzania at Jane Goodall's site.
Oh, wow.
Following chimpanzees and studying baboons. And she both taught great science and told great stories. And it really got me hooked on the idea of studying social behavior from the perspective of evolution and, with a little bit more experience from the perspective of our genes.
And so from the perspective of our genes and our experience, I mean, there's always been the nature-nurture debate, which really shouldn't be a debate. We're pretty convinced at this point, are we not, that it's a mix of the two. It's both.
Not a dichotomy. Yep, that's right.
But there are so many, I imagine there are so many factors that are involved in social behavior. I mean, what do you include in social behavior, and how do you study that, and then how that feeds into like the gene behavior feedback loop? that an
Yeah.
organism has?
So one of the biggest factors in any individual's social behavior when we're thinking about species like humans or other species that we study where, they know each other for a long time, they make friends with each other, they make enemies with each other, they know who is friends with each other, outside of their own relationships, is what other individuals are doing around you or to you or with you. Right? That's not in your genes. That's actually in your environment. It's the environment that's shaped for us or for a baboon or for a meerkat by other humans or baboons or meerkats. And much of the work we do asks how that type of environment, as opposed to, environments that we maybe think about more commonly, like, what you're eating or whether you're smoking or whether you've exercised or whether the weather's good or bad. We're interested in how that kind of environment shaped by interactions with other individuals influences your body. And I bring in genes because one of the ways my lab asks that question is to investigate how social interactions with others actually reaches deep down into cells to sort of change the way that our genes are actually regulated.
So this is with the assumption that if I'm nice to somebody or if I'm mean to somebody, is that going to affect them at the cellular level?
I think the evidence suggests that it can. We're often not talking about like single instances, right? You give somebody a dirty look, walking down the street, right? But, we all know that actually what can often make or break our day, what often gives you an adrenaline boost, right? That's a physiological reaction that we're all like really comfortable with, right? Butterflies in the stomach or that shooting fight or flight response. Those are physiological responses. Those are responses our bodies can have even when nobody has touched us. That's happened to me when I've opened an email that I liked or didn't like the contents of, right? And so you can imagine if that happens over and over again in life, or in a more serious vein, if you're in the type of social environment that creates sort of a routine low-level anxiety or chronic stress, then sure, yeah, that can have an effect on your body. And all of our cells carry the same DNA, more or less, for our entire lives, and all of our cells have exactly the same DNA as each other. But they're doing different things and our bodies are changing all the time. So one of the ways that happens is not by changing the DNA sequence, of course, but by changing how the genes in that DNA sequence are sort of turned up or turned down and so on. And that's one of the things we're interested in. And actually, a lot of work in animals now suggests that you can take out all of these other factors that really complicate how we think about this process in humans, like differences in diet or differences in healthcare access and so on, and really just focus on manipulating social relationships. And you see these kinds of consequences when you measure gene activity.
Yeah, wasn't there a study that was, I think it was initiated by somebody who had been studying stress and hierarchy in baboons, and I
think you might be looking at her. No, maybe.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not.
One of your colleagues, maybe.
And took it over to maybe, I don't know. I remember the study was fascinating, and took it over to the British Civil Service, and they had a hierarchy there, and when they had noticed stress levels and poor health outcomes for the low-ranking baboons, they saw similar, like heart disease was on increase, and like all these, like the lower you were in the civil service, the more stress you were under, and the more negative health outcomes people had if they stayed at these lower levels of the hierarchy.
Yeah, so you're talking about Robert Sapolsky. He was the baboon guy, the baboonologist, who is a great communicator of science and someone who's actually had a lot of different manners of influence on my career. But he started studying baboons in the wild in Kenya and was interested in the effects of hierarchy a number of decades ago, and started tracking things like how do low-ranking versus high-ranking baboons on this sort of social status ladder that they establish How do they regulate hormones that are associated with stress? How do they regulate measures of cardiovascular function that you can take in a wild baboon if you happen to have it asleep for just, a few hours. And then he didn't work directly with the British Civil Service study. That's what you're referring to is this famous landmark study called the Whitehall study of British civil servants. That was led by a guy named Michael Marmot, Sir Michael Marmot, who reported exactly the sorts of phenomena you're talking about. So the British Civil Service, these are all white collar, employees of
nobody's getting bitten or chased.
Probably. I mean, I don't know what goes on in the British Civil Service, but I think we can assume that day to day that's probably not a thing. And they basically have desk jobs. So we're talking about hierarchy. Yeah. So the Brits are really good at defining job categories. So they have job categories in this sort of ladder-like hierarchy too, kind of in some ways, like we can measure in other animals like baboons. And so Michael Marmot described these elevated rates of heart disease, especially in people who had lower status occupations in the civil service. And remember, this is Britain, so they have national health care.
That's the great thing. That was it. They all. It's not like in America where it's like wealth and then you have a healthcare disparity. No, they all have the exact same healthcare. That's a beautiful thing to be taken out of the equation.
That's a controlled variable for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he said, look, you're still seeing these differences in outcomes. And, we can still see them even if we take into account whether, certain people smoke more or whether they exercise more or less or so on. And his interpretation is that it has a lot to do with how much control you have over your job, yes, but also your sort of life and this sort of imbalance between effort and reward. And so you're probably thinking about them together because they've actually written a few papers together saying, hey, this is what we see in baboons and this is what we see in people. And isn't that remarkable that there do seem to be some parallels? And, honestly, some of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing has been very much inspired by some of those observations.
Yeah, and I want to talk about your most recent paper here in a couple of minutes, which does which reviews a lot of the animal research that has been done in this field. But a quick question before we jump into that, because it's related. There's another recent study that you published in one of the preprint archives of baboon epigenetic markers that the alphas, the ones at the higher end of the hierarchy, actually have major markers for epigenetic aging. And I love that the last phrase in your abstract that these alphas have a live fast, die young epigenetic profile. Can you talk a little bit about how that compares to the lower levels of the hierarchy?
Sure. I mean, it actually relates to what we were just talking about and what we think people in Whitehall probably are not doing, which is running around chasing each other and getting in physical competition, right? So we study female baboons and we study male baboons in this long-term field study that I'm fortunate enough to be involved in, the Amseli Baboon Research Project. And there's a big difference between how females determine their hierarchies and how males determine their hierarchies. Females kind of, their hierarchies don't change a lot over their lives.
Uh-oh. Is that me or is it just her?
No, it's Jenny. So we have a pause, so I'm going to guess that the hierarchies of the females don't change, but I have a feeling they live longer too. So
there's less competition overall. You just kind of come to terms with your spot and you're done.
Well, but I think it's also like that they aren't fighting. Like if you are the top baboon male, you've got to keep it through intimidation and physical dominance.
Yeah, right. So you're getting in lots of fights. You're going to be intimidating people. So you're going to be stressed out a lot, but you're not stressed out in the same way.
Yes.
as the lower
And
males.
with the females, though, I think it is going to run with the age. Like the older females are the matriarchs, and they just as long as they're alive, they got it. But you can be the male and be the top and lose that position to a more aggressive without dying, actually. But you can lose your position. You have to be at like peak baboon grumpiness to be the top banana in a baboon troop.
Peak grumpiest. You're the risk taker, the grumpiest, the strongest.
You got to be aggressive.
The loudest, the meanest,
Loud.
Maybe.
Yeah, a little rude.
I did not kick out Jenny.
Why did you kick her out? She was in the middle of explaining stuff to us.
It wasn't me, I promise. Hopefully it wasn't. I haven't heard from her. I'll go check my email, see if there's a note. Maybe something happened to her computer.
So I feel like, Kiki, you were amping up to this question. So I'm just going to check.
Put it out there.
Maybe we'll get back to it. But I'm hearing a lot of this like uncertainty and not having the agency to make change and all this kind of stuff as these main stressors that were impacting these animals because they were lower in the hierarchy. And I feel like that's what I was looking up was the tweet that I quoted last week, which was meetings lately are mostly, we don't know
version
much.
2.
What we do know, we can't tell you. Everything is going to change. Given the above, please make a plan. So those people that are currently working have like very little agency. Things are changing every day. Like this is a huge stress level that people are dealing with professionally over the course of, we're already at 3 months. That seems like something that could have some pretty big impacts down the road.
Yep. So I think that we will get to that.
Yeah.
Get to that conversation. Thank you for coming back. What happened? We're back with Dr. Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi. Sorry, I'm calling in on my phone because despite the fact that I've been on video conferences the whole day, it's decided to drop out on me now.
Oh, fair enough.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
No worries.
fine.
I have been there.
Yeah.
Audio and video are great if you want to. Yeah. So the last.
So that's the top males were having some issues, but and then you were about to contrast it with the sort of
females
top matriarch females in the group,
Right.
and that's when we lost it.
Yeah, so I guess probably what I was getting at was that so males reach high rank, they reach high status by physically competing with one another. And females don't. Females are mostly sort of ushered into the rank hierarchy by who their moms are. You know, they get a big familial advantage. And so, you know, in many respects, we're starting to think that the hierarchies in females are actually a better model for a lot of the sort of chronic social stress or stressful social environments that we are often thinking about in humans than our males are, because those males are actually the ones at the top of the hierarchy are the ones who are expending a lot of their energy and their time and you know, are potentially in stressful social situations because of the need to sort of make it to the top and then keep their spot when they're there. It's a huge benefit to them because if they make it to the top, that's how they have mating opportunities. That's the most likely way that they're going to have babies. So from a Darwinian fitness perspective, it's probably worth it. But, you know, we're starting to put together evidence from both the epigenetic aging sort of stuff and also from other work that some of my colleagues are doing on stress hormones that, you know, it might be worth it, but it doesn't mean it's cost-free for these guys.
Right. So there's a trade-off. There's at some point physiologically
so Kiki,
a cost.
sorry, for some reason I can't hear you.
Yeah, I've had this happen before where just one of the panels just drops out for some
Really?
reason, or can't.
I can
Yeah,
hear you,
it's
Kiki. That's so funny.
I can hear Kiki, but I've been there when the two of you were interviewing somebody, a fourth person, and a guest, and I couldn't see or hear the guest, but you two were both, oh yeah, and then asking questions. I'm like, I'm not seeing the same show. But Jenny, I do have a question to this. Is it so the males they can sort of get to this position of power within the troop, and then can they get demoted and then stay in the troop and then start to experience like what it's like to be an underling, or do they just leave after if things don't work out?
They can do both. They have options. Sometimes none of them good, but they can lose rank, and they can decide, I've had enough of this particular social group, and that social group over there looks like it's got some better opportunities for me, and they can make a move and see how they do there. Or they can decide to stick around, and sometimes, they have long-standing social relationships that they've already established in that group. I don't know if we have to still use scare quotes around this word, but the idea that there are friendships in baboons, and particularly friendships between males and females, actually goes back a long ways. There was a time in which we were really, really not supposed to use that kind of terminology because it's anthropomorphic. So, I can say that they often have strong social bonds, with especially females in the group. And so that might be an incentive to stay, even if they drop in rank.
I think if you're getting groomed, that's by a friend. That's decent. You don't let strangers groom you, typically. I wouldn't think.
If Jenny can't hear me,
I think that the best indicators of friendship, not only that, but they groom you. You groom them. You do so more with each other than you do with other individuals around you. It's not so different. The currency is grooming, which isn't something that, we as humans do quite as often. But those kinds of patterns of consistency and reciprocity and sort of discrimination in favor of another individual that you're around a lot. Yeah, that looks a lot in many ways like.
I think a haircut has much higher currency these days than it used to. I think that's growing.
That's right. Yeah.
So Kiki, you can't hear her, but she can hear you, and she has a question, which I'm going to put through the telegraph.
Yes, we're going to put it through the telegraph. So I'm wondering if there are.
So she's wondering if there are
not just negative effects to social stress, but positive.
But positive.
Well,
That's. Was that the right question? I'm seeing.
That was like verbatim.
I'm imagining what it's going to sound like to listen to this podcast. And that's what the shake was. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're just imposing some very low-level social stress on ourselves right now.
Yes.
Are there positive aspects of social stress? Well, I'm gonna try and probably incompletely answer that from the perspective of, are there positive aspects to stress? Like, we have a stress response, and that stress response has evolved to help us deal with things that, are not quite right, that disrupt the way our bodies normally function. And so if you are a male baboon or female baboon for that matter, and you're being chased by another individual in your group who has, 3-inch long canines, it's good to have a response to that, right? It's probably a much better idea to mobilize your energetic resources, which is one of the things that some of these stress hormones do, and get your butt out of there. Right. And that's an appropriate response. I think the question of whether there are positive or, if you want to think about it in the context of evolution and natural selection, adaptive components to a chronically stressful situation is still a bit of an open question. Because we know that chronic stress starts to change actually the way stress responses work. Actually, your body, your cells stop paying attention to those immediate responses in the same way that they do when it's just sort of this acute kind of stressor. Understanding whether that has benefits has not been very easy, in fact, right? Because maybe it's better that our bodies make that adjustment relative to not making any adjustment at all, even in the long run. But from the perspective of just asking, okay, if we look at an individual who's chronically stressed and an individual who's not chronically socially stressed, who's doing better from the perspective of health outcomes, disease susceptibility, living longer, generally speaking, where there's a detectable effect, and here I'm talking about both humans and a variety of other social mammals, it's better not to be chronically socially stressed, right? It's just it's unclear that that's the right comparison that we need to make to understand the evolution of this response.
But is it true that if you take the word chronic out of there, right? If you look at a life without stress, devoid of stress, versus some stress.
Like your dog chewing on a squeaky toy.
Yeah, like when I'm trying to. Isn't there? There's some sort of benefit to that, right? Like a life without stress at all, when you're not using those kind of pathways and mechanisms. There's potential drawbacks, aren't there?
To be honest, I don't think we know. Because I don't think there's been a life without stress.
That's a great point.
I'm trying to think about how you would do that kind of experiment.
Well, there's probably, I mean, my guess would be you would have to look at somebody who you might have to look at a form of a spectrum of a personality disorder or something where somebody might not literally feel of any kind of a fight or flight response, but you'd have to take it away from something that is the norm of any organism to do so. Yeah. I mean, it's like, maybe psychopaths actually don't get stressed, but that might not be the point of being stress-free either. There are things like positive stress that are motivators. There's helpful levels of stress. That if it's not enough, you might not be as engaged, or if it's too much, it might be deleterious. But it's a weird balance.
Well, yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of captive animals, where you can look at them and you can say, like, okay, they have never felt that they were in danger of being predated upon. They have never had to look for food. Like everything has always been brought to them. They haven't had to forage for bedding supplies, right? And then versus you can do things like spray scent markings from animals that they might compete over space with in their space, make them more active, right? So I think that's kind of where I was looking at this from, was not necessarily in humans, but with animals, you can kind of see anecdotally, it looks like it would be beneficial to have some sort of stress at some point in your life versus none ever.
So I think this actually relates to, the idea that our social interactions are potentially a major cause of both rewarding, outcomes, but also stress. I think we do these kinds of experiments. I'll just be really concrete, right? We study social primates in captivity too, and they live in groups together, and they all have enough to eat, and nobody's going to eat them, and they actually all have universal health care too, right? In as much as that exists for captive primates, and they're stressed because they interact with each other. Now, it'd be much worse for them if they weren't living with each other. But living with each other, they form dominance hierarchies. They push each other around. They negotiate social relationships with each other that are not always producing the outcome that a particular individual wants, right? So I think, again, for intrinsically social species, like we have people that we love in our lives, right? And we're much happier that they're in our lives and not in our lives. But that doesn't mean that they never stress us out. I think for a social creature, it would actually be very, very difficult to imagine a life without stress, right? And a life that, even in the absence of all those things that we usually think about as environmental stressors, we still have each other.
I think this is a great seg into the review paper that we wanted Yeah, this is a great segue into the review paper.
Oh, there's
Yes,
there's a segue
Kiki
into a review paper.
wanted to ask. So your review paper in Science, can you tell us more about what you looked at, what you concluded, and how potentially it's related to this conversation we're having right now?
Sure, totally. Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, partly because I want to make clear that this idea that our social environments are major determinants of our health and well-being is like a really old idea in the social sciences. Colleagues of mine who work in sociology, if you tell them, well, I learned that social isolation, predicts a shorter lifespan, they'll say, well, Durkheim told us that, in the late 19th century, right? This is old, but understanding why that's happening in humans, is it because we live in these weird societies that are very different from maybe our evolutionary past, or is it because, lower socioeconomic status is correlated with smoking behavior, or is it because if you're sick, then you can't finish your education, right? All of these possible pathways are acting together. It's been hard, even though the observations have been there in humans, to understand what's going on and whether there is a fundamental biology to what are often termed the social determinants of health. So one of the things we were really interested in is taking results from the last 10 years and just trying to pull them together to ask, well, what's the evidence that social integration versus social isolation, or being high or low on a status hierarchy that we can measure in other species, has similar kinds of outcomes, especially for lifespan, as have been observed in humans. These kinds of studies have only recently started to be done in other wild social mammals, because you need to follow animals over their entire lifespans to know, what happened to them and when they died. And so often you need decades and decades of individually centered data to get this. But people have started to have those kinds of data for a lot of different species now. And what it looks like is that we are really not alone in these kinds of phenomena. So what I mean by that concretely is that there is now evidence that less socially integrated, more socially isolated whales, dolphins, baboons, rhesus macaques, horses, also live shorter lifespans than other individuals who are around them, who are experiencing the same kind of physical environment, who are socially integrated. And similar kinds of patterns have been described for early life social adversity and for differences in social status. That combines with some other studies that we reviewed that are really focused on captive animals, where you can do a lot of that fine scale control that Blair was talking about. You can give them all the same diet, right? You can rule that kind of thing out. And in some of those contexts, there's also really good evidence now that chronic social stress imposed by things like low social status translates to higher rates of heart disease, higher rates in some cases of vulnerability to respiratory viruses, higher rates of things that look like a pre-diabetic kind of syndrome. And so put together, I think it tells us two things. One is that we didn't invent the dependencies on the social environment. This seems to be something that evolves often when animals evolve to depend on living together with each other. And two, that, if we want to understand the social determinants of health, studying other species might be a really valuable way to get at that question.
Yeah.
Something I've been finding interesting is there are rising levels during this stay-at-homeness of domestic violence. This is usually the thing that people will talk about when they talk about what stresses you out. It's usually work. And now they don't have that other stress. They don't have this competing stress from having a home life stress. Are we also now, have we developed, do you think, maybe, this is, so you're allowed to speculate a little bit on this show. It's okay.
I've already
The study isn't
done
done
some
yet.
speculations.
Okay, good. Because it seems like when we were breaking up, we had sports to stress about, and like team was going to do great or they did terrible, so we were up or we're down, and then work was going good or bad, and we were stressed. And then we got home and things were okay, or maybe they weren't, but it was just that one day we had an argument. Now we're fine. Now, like everything that we're going through is just in this one social group of home for a lot of people, for most people who are staying home. It's interesting that that's resulting in domestic violence because we don't have a lot of the other stresses that we would normally put ourselves through to sort of dissipate where our attention to stress is. Does this make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly, I think it relates to some of the things that we point out in the paper are different between humans and the other animals that that people study the sort of social determinants of health in, which is that in other animals, basically your social environment is completely structured by the other individuals that you actually physically interact with, right? So we're really talking about social relationships between that other baboon that you can see right over there, and then the one over there and the one over there. But we humans are, a really sophisticated and tricky species, and we have social relationships with people that we aren't physically adjacent to all the time, right? We think about social status in the context of wealth and income and educational attainment and social prestige and all this sort of stuff, and we can still do that. And in fact, anxiety about unemployment and about social disparities related to the pandemic, those may not be about people who are in the same household as you, but those are still social pressures that are causing a lot of stress right now. So I think we're still part of those larger environments. And it's actually one of the things that makes this topic so hard to study in humans is that we are members often simultaneously of a bunch of different social communities at the same time, right? And so, as you say, things could be going great at work, but poorly in your social environment at home, or, they could be going swimmingly at church, but you're doing really poorly on your softball team. And which of those things are salient to you and to the outcomes that we care about in terms of health can be tricky to disentangle, right? They may interact in complicated ways. So there's a sense in which when we study other animals, we're really, really simplifying that picture, because then it's really just about sort of simpler notions of status and integration among the other individuals directly around you. And that's a benefit of studying animal models, right? We study animal models because they simplify something that's complicated in a way that can help us understand it. But it's also a limitation because we don't have the same sort of complexities of, stigma that can be projected over Twitter among people that you will never, ever meet, and yet can have strong effects on people's, certainly mental health. We know that quite well.
As we're coming to the end, Blair, I think you had a question about the constraints on choice that people are feeling right now. So I think that if you asked that, Jenny, it would be great.
Yeah. So obviously all the stuff that we're talking about has a lot of implications on the crazy, unusual, unprecedented times we're dealing with right now, as everyone likes to say. And I think, we've talked a lot about social kind of relationships, but I think the other side of this pandemic that is I know affecting me and must be affecting other people. I'm kind of curious, based on what you know about stress and social dynamics and stuff, how this might be related, is this idea that you have so little control over all these different variables related to your job from day to day. So I read this tweet last week and I'm going to read it again. It was, meetings lately are mostly like this. We don't know much. What we do know, we can't really tell you. Everything is going to change. Given the above, please make a plan. So just kind of living in this constant fight or flight of, I'm going to do this and it might be worth something and it might be worth nothing. And just kind of this high level lack of control, but also high stress moment professionally. I'm just kind of curious if, based on what you know, if you expect to see any kind of long-term impacts from that on us as a society.
I think a lot of people are really interested in that question. And I mean, I think we'll certainly see long-term outcomes on society from the pandemic, and teasing apart how much of that is because of the physiological exposure to stress. And yeah, I mean, uncertainty is massively stressful, especially in the way that, you know, many people are experiencing it right now. I mean, I think there are going to be a lot of long-term outcomes to this pandemic due to exposure to the virus, you know, in a straightforward way, due to the fact that it's massively magnifying health disparities because of who's being impacted, and because people aren't, you know, aren't pursuing regular medical care. All those things are going to happen. I think your question is there an additional factor on top of that that's due to the direct experience of stress itself? And I think it's possible, right?
Yeah.
The closest I can tell you is that we've done some work asking about whether it's whether when we look at the particular types of outcomes we look at, like sort of gene activity, for example, or stress hormone physiology, is it about what you're experiencing now, or is it about what you were experiencing a year ago, right? If we can actually construct it so that what you're experiencing a year ago, for example, your place in the social status hierarchy, is not correlated with what you're experiencing now. And by and large, for several years, we were like, it's all about what's happening right now. Like, you move up in the hierarchy, you look like you're high ranking, you're high status. You fall down in the hierarchy, you're low status. And in a sense, if that were the case, then one would hope that once, you know, an experience, an incredibly population level stressful experience like the pandemic paths, that we have a lot of scope for recovery. We actually just did an analysis last year, and we went, oh, actually, yeah, a lot of it's about where you are now, but we can see the signature of where you were in the past too. It still gets carried around at least about a year later, which was the amount of time that we had to study this in rhesus macaques. You know, the signature of gene activity still told us something about whether a year ago that individual had been, you know, doing really well or doing, you know, relatively poorly in its group.
Do we know?
We don't know how long that lasts. Yeah. We don't know if that is really parallel to what we're happening right now, but it says, yeah, it's possible, right? It's possible that we may carry a baggage of extended stress forward over time. And, you know, obviously I think the jury's still out on that, but it's a fascinating question to look at.
Monkeys, baboons
oddly
don't
meditate. Me of my grandmother, who grew up through the Great Depression, who had the biggest, most packed pantry that you could ever possibly, like canned food, like everything could shut down. Like if this was going on, she had food for like a year, all canned goods, but for like a year, and frozen. She had like 2 freezers in the back. But it also reminded me of is it a Norwegian or Swedish farm that where it was like generations later, you could see the stress that prepubescents had gone through in times of feast or famine on their grandchildren, like the epigenetics. Yeah.
Possible. Those are hard studies to do because you got to go through multiple generations.
And you got to starve some of them, which is
well, yeah, you probably wouldn't do that. That's what scientists like to call a natural experiment. And I think the thing that you bring up about your grandmother, right? Like that is, I think what you're describing is long-term behavioral change, right? And so what that means is that you have an experience, and then say it happens now, and we all start hoarding toilet paper into the future, right? And there's something about hoarding toilet paper.
This becomes the thing.
Exactly, and that has an immediate physiological response. Then you have those are both long-term effects of an experience, right? But they're long-term effects that we might think about in different kinds of ways, right? There's a long-term effect that you just, and instead of like sort of keep that in your mind, right?
Yeah, and so instead of being like, oh, there's 4 rolls left, and now I'm stressed, we need to get. Now you're like, I'm down to my last 60 rolls of toilet paper, and that stress is kicking in.
That's right. Time to fill up another closet.
Yeah.
So as we kind of look forward to the next stage of all of this, how is there anything that you can take from what you've learned studying non-human animals and specifically baboons that maybe we could apply to managing stress in ourselves?
Oh boy. I am so averse to making any sort of recommendations for what other people should do. So I'll try and turn that around and say that doing this kind of work has helped stress to me the importance of, trying to hold people that I care about close and to try and check in on them. And we were talking a little bit before we went live about the natural introversion of many scientists, and I'm among them. I like interacting with people, but then I have to go take a nap afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think working in this area does, it just makes me walk around all the time thinking, boy, one of the most important things in our world is how we interact with other people. So I'm sure that's at the forefront of my mind more often than it might be if I hadn't gotten the chance to study the baboons.
Nice. Well, Jenny, we want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This is fascinating. Hopefully we can dive further into this subject another time. Where can people find out more about you and follow you online?
You can follow me on Twitter at jtung5. You can check out my lab website at tung-lab.org. You can check out the Amboseli Baboon Research Project, which is even more interesting at, Amboseli Baboons, amboselibaboons.nd.edu. So those are all good sources of information.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jenny Tung. We are going to take a very quick break. I hope you all stay tuned for more This Week in Science. Coming up next.
You can always tell it's going to be a good interview when they dance to the opening music.
It's good. It's true.
I'll take that as a compliment, not necessarily as a dance.
Some people feel like, am I supposed? I'll just pretend I'm a statue, and then you can see the lean back as they shrink in camera.
But that would feel even more awkward, to go back and forth between your awesome moves and then just be like.
Yeah, no, you're right there.
You have to assert your dominance in the space by.
I'm just
That's
trying to
right.
assert some level of membership. I just want you to know that I see you.
Joining the social
I'm so
group.
sorry. I don't understand what happened here. It's super weird, but it was really fun doing this.
No, either.
So
It never made sense to
was
me
wonderful.
because
Thank you.
the whole concept was that we went to one server and then it gets bounced back to us, but obviously we get different feeds, which is really weird.
I don't know. That's bizarre. Well, Kiki said it was wonderful. If you could hear that.
Thank you. To work on my lip reading skills. It's almost midnight here, so I'm gonna head to bed. But I really appreciate you having me. Thank you very much, Kiki, for inviting me. It was really fun talking about all this
You're
stuff.
welcome.
She said you're welcome.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Oh no.
Oh my God, that was one of the best ever. Okay.
That was wild. It's wild stuff.
It was wild. I have a feeling Justin is moving out for his little break, but our break isn't going to be that long because we do want to keep the show moving. So I would love to say thank you for listening to TWIS. You are the reason that we are able to do what we do every week, bringing you up to date and down-to-earth views on science discoveries. And with your help, we can do even more. Together, we can bring a sane perspective to a world full of misinformation. Head to twist.org right now, click on that Patreon link, and choose your level of support. Be a part of bringing sanity and science to more people.
And we're back. You're listening to This Week in Science. Kiki,
Ooh.
you got a COVID update for us?
Beep, 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 beep. I do have a COVID update for us, faux show. And I just want to let you know that the numbers of dead continue to increase, but the rate of new deaths seems to be plateauing in the United States, if not decreasing slightly, which is good news. However, the World Health Organization warned this week that the first wave of infections is not yet complete. We are not out of the woods yet, so don't become complacent. They continue to suggest people wash their hands, wear masks, and stay home when possible. Now, big questions enter into how we're going to move forward with all this. What are we going to be doing? How are we going to treat people? We have talked previously about convalescent plasma, and a couple of studies out this week suggest that this convalescent plasma, Blair, do I need to define it? Should I tell you what the convalescent plasma is?
It's blood from people who had it and didn't die, right?
Ding, ding.
Yes.
You get it correctly. Yes.
Ode to Tom Hanks is what you might consider.
And so it is plasma. It's not the blood, it's the plasma. It's the stuff that's not the blood cells. And that plasma contains antibodies if the person recovered and was able to fight off the disease. Now, these antibodies vary in their concentrations in different people's bloods because some people didn't have a very strong immune reaction to the disease, the virus in the first place. Some people might have had a really strong immune reaction. Other people may not have had they might not have had a lot of virus in them to fight off. And so there are a lot of factors that go into play in how much antibody is actually present that could be able to do work on people. That said, there have been a couple of studies, one looking at rhesus macaques and another looking at human patients, and there were a few previous as well. This one in human patients most recently looked at a fairly large sample size. However, it wasn't completely controlled. It wasn't a double-blind, random controlled study. But what they discovered is that the patients that were given convalescent plasma did recover. They recovered more quickly, slightly more quickly than patients who did not receive the convalescent plasma. And there did seem to be a reduction in the number of individuals that went to the more severe disease states and required ventilation if they were given the convalescent plasma early. So there is a timing in which they think the plasma may be beneficial. So earlier the better. But the jury is still out on whether or not it works. Now, that said, there is another strategy that people are using. Let me see if I can find the article that I was looking at. I was just talking. So there's another strategy that has been used in the past that's not convalescent plasma, but is it's called hyperimmune globulin. And what they do is they take a lot of blood from a lot of people and they pool it. So instead of taking...
I was going to make a joke, mix it up in a big bowl. It's like pretty much that. Yeah.
That's what they do. And so they call it hyperimmune globulin. And so it's the difference between taking a bag of plasma from a single donor and giving it to a single recipient versus they're taking all the bags of plasma, mixing them all together and concentrating it so that it is a known concentration of antibodies within the hyperimmune globulin. And this was attempted for the H1N1 virus when that came around, and there was a large amount of this convalescent the plasma that was made into this globulin for H1N1, but then that ended up being mild and they didn't end up using it. But researchers are saying now that this is going to last for a while. They don't foresee it going away, and they think it's going to make a difference because there are studies now showing, there's a paper out in Nature showing specifically how an antibody binds to the SARS-CoV-2 receptor or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they're showing mechanisms. We have studies showing that antibodies are giving some immunity, and we're having this good news that antibody, or at least convalescent plasma treatment, is having a slight effect, or at least an effect that's promising enough that the major controlled studies are going forward.
At the very least, this mixing bowl of antibodies could give a more consistent supply to doctors, which, if there's research to base up how much is needed to cross a certain threshold, can actually be actioned upon, as opposed to it's got a number of antibodies and we don't know how long you should be doing a transfusion. I mean, it does give at least a dosage, if you will, schedule effect to it, which is, that's smart.
Yeah, it is smart. It would be an interesting way to move forward with this. And so hopefully the controlled studies looking at the plasma will find a bigger benefit, and that will hopefully convince companies, people, whoever does this, that compiles all of the plasma to make the globulin that can then be used liter after liter to be able to help save lives, because we are going to need those treatments. Now, on the other side of it, we keep hearing schools can't open until there's a vaccine. We can't do this until there's a vaccine. We can't do that until there's a vaccine. And there was an article out in Stat News this week that I think is a very important one, written by Helen Branswell, called "The World Needs COVID-19 Vaccines. It may also be overestimating their power." And what it goes on to say is what we've talked about previously, is that vaccines are not always 100% effective. In fact, very rarely are they 100% effective. Often they need boosters, or they only confer a limited period of time for resistance. So the flu virus, you have to get because the flu virus mutates so quickly, you need a new vaccine, jab every year. Hopefully the coronavirus does not have that happen. Hopefully, we've seen so far it doesn't appear to mutate that quickly. So hopefully we can get a vaccine and it'll confer a certain amount of immunity. But it's likely that it may only confer about 50% protection, maybe. We don't know. We have no idea how much protection we're going to get. And the researchers moving this forward still think, there's a quote from Vincent Munster, who is the chief of the virus ecology unit at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Hamilton, Montana. And he says, if we push the disease from pneumonia to a common cold, then I think that's a huge step forward. And that's another aspect of, if you don't have 100% resistance or immunity from a vaccine and it's only partial, does that mean that you still get slightly sick, but then it's just a cold and it's not something that puts you in the hospital on a ventilator? And that's a win in a public health sense. Along those lines, there was a survey also this year of people to see whether or not they would get the COVID-19 vaccine, and 50% of the respondents said that they would. So how do we get that number higher is the question.
50%.
Yes.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people everywhere, I'm quite convinced that half of the people on this planet are idiots. I don't have another way of saying it anymore. Like, it's just getting to the point where it's you know what keeps running through my head when I keep seeing like these people arguing against wearing a face mask or whatever it is. that's just ridiculously dumb at this point. I keep thinking of when you brought up the Bob Newhart psychology bit on
Stop
Saturday
it.
Night Live. Stop it.
Just stop
But I
it.
really think stop it. No, but we've got to do something about stop it. It's going to be, this is going to take about at most 5 minutes, probably 3. That's the average. But go ahead and say what your thing is. Okay. And stop it. That's it. Like, I don't have another response to these people anymore. I really don't. That's just all I have now.
So
Is
I have
that
a question. How was this survey administered? Do you know? Because
Yes. Yes. So this survey, let me get to the bottom of my article. This was an AP-NORC poll of 1,056 adults conducted May 14th to 18th using a sample drawn from a probability-based Amerispeak panel designed to be representative of the U.S. population. Margin of sampling error is plus or minus 4.2 percentage points.
My problem with stuff like this is that there's still some self-selection going on in who responds.
Usually, yes, there is, but I think it's interesting enough.
Yeah.
People, what we have to do, and Justin, I think this is to your point. Yes, I want people to, let's all have a conversation, and can we get past this? Can we do the things we need to do to get past it? But we have to address people's fear. We have to address their misconceptions. We have to understand why they're coming from where they are coming from. And one of the things that I'm going to continue to say is that just because we are pushing the speed of vaccine development forward, what that means is it is resource allocation. We are allocating people and time and money to getting this done because this is a very serious situation for the globe. That does not mean that it is shortchanging the way the vaccine is getting produced, that it is going to produce a less safe vaccine than other vaccines, that it will not go through the testing that it needs to be go through. We need to. It's not just fast. It's going to be fast and good.
Well, no, it may
and not
actually
cheap. There's a lot of money going toward it.
Yeah.
So it may actually be shortchanging the investment. That's the thing that's at risk is not the outcome treatment. The thing that is most at risk with all of this is the money that is put into it. Usually, money put into something in a pharmaceutical sense is done very stepwise so that there's the least amount of financial exposure if it doesn't work out. Yeah. What they're doing is they're taking that sort of protection away and saying, let's spend and lose if we have to get there. And that is the risk that's being taken is financial risks and not health risks.
No.
Yeah, I think that's the part that is a big disconnect. Is I'm hearing a lot of narratives that are the implication is like, oh well, because they pushed it through, I'm getting it as soon as they're done with the mice. It's like, no, that's not.
You can volunteer.
Steps.
You can volunteer to be part of a trial.
Yes,
you can.
Absolutely. But there's still going to be trials before everybody's getting it. And I think that, like you were saying, that's this kind of disconnect is just because it's going faster doesn't mean we're all lab rats now. That's not how this works.
It's not how it works. No.
Charmin in the chat room. Charmin in the chat room. But herd immunity needs 70% social immunity. This is an argument that I don't know that I quite am right or understand, but it seems to me that herd immunity can be any percentage, and it's lending to a reduction, or what the term we're currently familiar with, a flattening of the curve. It could be 30%, it could be 20%. You will still be flattening that curve, but the higher the amount you have, obviously, and you can throw vaccines into part of that herd immunity at some point when some of us have it and some of us don't have access to it yet. you are still slowing the rate. So the greater it is, I guess, it
Herd,
just means
so
it can
when
be.
when it's less than sufficient, when it's a percentage of the population that's less than sufficient to stop the spread of the disease, then you don't have herd immunity. You are the larger the percentage you have, the greater, or the flatter
Yeah.
the curve will become.
Absolutely.
If it's 30%, you flatten more slowly than if it's 50%. 70% is going to be great. But you can't just say we need 70% because it does depend specifically on the population you're talking about. And some populations may need to be close to 100% to have protection. Other populations, it might be less, but it depends on the individuals that make your population up.
Yeah, and I'm going to use a make-me-up number.
Isn't this 70% also partially based on the idea of a percentage of the community being immunocompromised,
Yes.
older, too
Not
young?
able.
Like
Mhm.
that is exactly what that 70 is from, right?
Yeah, the idea is that you're protecting that percentage of the population. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not quite that simple. So, if because this is a magnitudinal growth situation, when we're talking about if we had a 20% herd immunity at the beginning of this outbreak, it wouldn't mean we would have 80,000 deaths instead of 100,000. It might mean that we had somewhere like 40,000 because a lot.
But herd immunity is specific to the. I thought it was specific to the state of a population when it is immune,
protected.
It's protected from a virus, from a disease.
Yes. But still, having some herd immunity, having some immunity
You're
within the
using
herd.
it
Maybe I
wrong.
need
Yes.
to be
Immunity
using it
within
wrong.
the herd.
Having
Yes.
some immunity within the herd.
Yeah.
If we were at 20% when this thing started, it wouldn't have just reduced the death toll by 20%. Because the rate at which things grow, every reduction reduces 10, which reduces those 10 getting another 10. So it doesn't have to. We don't have to get there to say that we've gotten to that point. But we do absolutely, also to your point, need a vaccine that would be sufficient, even if it wasn't the silver bullet vaccine, even if it was 50%.
Oh, it'll help for sure.
Yes,
It will help.
yes.
Yeah. Anything is going to help us, but at this point, there are what the stat article was suggesting is that we can't pin all of our hopes on a vaccine because although we are pushing things forward, we don't know if any of them are really going to work. There's a lot of promising stuff right now, and all the promising stuff is getting all the news, and it's fantastic. There's an adenovirus vaccine that just got great positive results in China. The Moderna vaccine is moving forward. There's the Oxford vaccine is great. There's all sorts of vaccines that are moving forward apace, and it's fantastic. But we don't know if we're going to have something in 18 months. We don't know if we're going to have something in 4 years. And to pin all of our social efforts on the advent of a vaccine is not a good idea because we don't know if it's going to come. So we need to use other methods like contact tracing and social isolation for infected or for exposed individuals. We need to have methods, mask wearing. We need to adopt social and public health measures and basically have a plan in order to move back to more normal behaviors even before a vaccine comes out, and because that's what we're going to need.
Yeah, you need to prevent transmission, you need to prevent infection, and then you need to prevent fatality after infection. Like you need all of those different arenas.
And I also want anybody who's watching any news networks that are arguing that we should be going out and resuming business as usual, notice that they are all broadcasting from home.
Yeah, they are. They're all broad.
They're not
Go back to
taking
work.
that advice that they are giving you.
Yep. All right, let's move on from COVID-19 and into some fun science. What about bumblebees, Justin? You got bumblebees?
Well, if you give me a few minutes because of the state of my computer. Oh, here we go. Okay, so in the new normal, That is global warming. Spring is getting sprung earlier than it ever has before, thanks to temperatures more typical of early summertime that we've been having in the spring. Many plants were already in full bloom by mid-April, a good 3 to 4 weeks earlier than in non-global warming normal days. So these new normal seasonal anomalies are resulting in food web uncertainty by disrupting the timing of relationship between plants and birds and insects and other animals that have seasonal predation habits or reliances upon each other. This is the case study from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. They were looking at plants and their insect pollinators and trying to see how that relationship has been affected. Research team led by professors Consuela de Moraes and Mark Mescher have discovered that one peculiar bumblebee behavior may be carving them out a niche. It may actually be a skill set that these bumblebees have. They find that bumblebee workers use their mouth parts to pinch into leaves of plants that haven't flowered. The resulting damage stimulates the production of new flowers on those plants that bloom earlier than those on plants that haven't been given this mouthy bite nudge. Amazingly, bumblebees have a trick to get flowers to produce to get plants to produce flowers earlier than they normally would. The researchers first noticed the behavior during the other experiments being undertaken by one of the authors. Pollinators were biting the leaves to test plants in the greenhouse. Quote voice of Fodanini Pasha. I'm going to mess up your name. I'm so sorry. One of the researchers. Our further investigation, we found that others had also observed such behaviors, but no one had explored what the bees were doing to the plants or reported an effect on flower production. This is a quote actually from Mescher. Following up on their observations, researchers devised several new laboratory experiments, also conducted some outdoor studies using some available bumblebee colonies, and a variety of different plant species as well. Based on their lab studies, the researchers were able to show that bumblebees' propensity to damage leaves has a strong correlation with the amount of pollen they can obtain from those plants. So it sounds like bumblebees have been there before. They kind of get how to it's like almost like a little bit of plant husbandry, isn't it?
A little. They're like, if I bite you, you're going to be better to me.
I was thinking it was more like tickling somebody until they sneeze.
Who sneezes when they get tickled? I've
like,
never,
with like a feather under the nose makes you sneeze.
No.
In cartoons,
cat hair on my nose makes me sneeze.
But anyway,
okay,
that's more what I was
Blair,
picturing was
you live
like
in a strange household. you should probably not have shared that. Probably has some deep, some deep psychological scenario.
This is a really interesting thing, though. I mean, why would this physical damage? Have they figured out a mechanism? Why does this physical damage lead to more pollen production? And how did bees figure out this relationship? Mm-hmm. So interesting.
Well, bees care about flowering plants. So if this is, when I say care, if this is just sort of a random behavior that some bumblebees at some point started doing, okay, for whatever, a gene that was supposed to get them to go look for another plant got tweaked, and now they have this behavior where they just get mad at the plant for not having flowers and they bite it. They get stressed out, like, oh, you stupid. But then it turned out the plant responded by flowering early, so the behavior continues. Those bees that have this biting activity towards the plant. If you're asking me to explain the evolution of this behavior, I'm just guessing.
Don't guess.
Something like
no.
This. Yeah. Something like this. Well, of course, that's the next thing is to go look for the mechanism within the plant that does this. But it is sort of interesting that the bumblebee has something in its bag of tricks to handle the early spring, to handle the plants that maybe haven't flowered yet or are flowered too early and get them to flower again. So bumblebees will survive this.
It's fascinating. I want to know the mechanism. I want to know why. I mean, is this really just correlation and it happens to just be oh, that happened? Or is it really causational? They need to figure that out now because I want to know.
Is it co-evolution, which is what I was wondering, is specifically if the plant wants to know when the bee bee is there. Because it behooves them to let the bees pollinate. So
this is how the bee lets the plant know that it's there.
Yeah.
I'm here. Bite.
Hey,
flower.
Hey, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake
Do your
up.
thing.
It's time.
Hey, it's me.
Do your thing. I'm here. I'm your friend.
Hey,
can be pretty
you
dramatic.
got that package for me?
Look, listen to this one. This is pretty dramatic. Tomato plants that got bitten flowered up to 30 days earlier than those that had not been targeted. In the life cycle of a plant, 30 days is pretty huge.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Mustard plants were 14 days earlier when they got the bite. So there's a pretty strong, it's pretty dramatic correlation this far. They think it might have something to do with during the development stage of a growing plant, a young plant. Might be something in there, but they were studying bees. They weren't studying the plants. Now they got to.
Now they have to study the plants. I don't know. I'm just imagining now going around biting the postal carriers to get them to bring me more packages.
Okay, Kiki, you do need to stop doing that. This has gone on too long.
I'm here. Bring me more packages. That's not going to work. Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, if you're here, you just tuned in to This Week in Science. If you are interested in a TWIS shirt, mug, or face mask of TWIS merchandise, yes, go to twis.org and click on the Zazzle link to browse our store. Our face masks are in now. It's exciting. You can go get a TWIS face mask, a Blair's Animal Corner art face mask. Oh, and it is time now for Blair's Animal Corner.
With Blair.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
Did you know
Nope.
that there are frogs in Mexico and South America that are translucent?
Sounds like a wonderful model animal for researchers.
It does.
That means you can see into their insides.
It means you can kind of see through them. So they're called glass frogs, and scientists have known about them for a while. But this new study from University of Bristol, McMaster University, and University de las Americas Quito sought to establish the ecological importance of glass frogs and their translucency, and have found what they think is a new kind of camouflage. So they're not all the way see-through, so they're not transparent, even though they have been explained for a very long time as the kind of quintessential transparent camouflage example. But they're not transparent because true transparency would mean you could see all the way through them. But these guys, they still have a green hue. So they're always green no matter what, but they are brighter or darker depending on their background. And the change in brightness makes them match their background better, which is usually green leaves, so it's helpful that they're green. But there was something missing here, because if it was really just to match their background, they could just be green and it would probably be fine. So why do they have this translucency? And even more interesting, they discovered that the amount that they were translucent was different in different parts of their body. Their legs are more translucent than the rest of them. And so when their legs are tucked to the sides of them, it actually creates a diffuse gradient from leaf color to frog color. It makes them fuzzy around the edges. So they have deemed this a brand new form of camouflage called edge diffusion.
Oh, so if you can't see the edges, you're just generally going to be harder to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is also the reason that a lot of animals are striped or spotted or like splotchy in coloration, is to break up their body shape. Because even if he was the perfect color green for that leaf, if he jumped onto a different leaf, he would suddenly be a frog-shaped green blob. So you want to be a different shape. Even if you don't match your space perfectly, you want to make sure that you're not a animal-shaped blob of whatever color you are. So there's different ways that animals do that. But in this case, they're saying that this edge diffusion allows their edge to get specifically very like fuzzy. So it's really hard to tell that green blip that doesn't quite match the leaf is a frog. It could be a droplet of water. It could be moss. It could be any number of things that is also green, but is not necessarily a snack. So that's it's a wild idea for a new way that animals might be using camouflage. So they studied this with behavioral trials in the field, computational visual modeling, and computer-based detection experimentation. So all of those things together allowed them to kind of build this theory of edge diffusion. So this is pretty cool. It's not every day that you discover a new method of camouflage.
And so now the question is, yeah, it's very cool. Now the question is, when you go back and look at different species, how many of them are using this?
Yeah. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that kind of one of the reasons the researchers wanted to dive deeper into how glass frog transparency works is that transparency would be the best camouflage. That's very clear. Like if you can look exactly like whatever you're behind or in front of, that's the best way. That's the best way to evade detection and evade being eaten.
And you don't have to have weird melanophores or the things that the octopuses and squids have.
Right.
Chromatophores?
And when you're looking for transparency in camouflage, you can usually find it in the aquatic environment, and it's because animal tissues have a similar refractive index to water. We're all bags of liquid, we know that. So it makes sense. It's similar. But when you take a bag of liquid, an animal of any sort, and you put them up on land in open air, they have completely different refractive indices. They have different ways that they act. And so transparency is way less effective in terrestrial environments. So even though they often call glass frogs the poster board example of terrestrial transparency, it's starting to be clear that they're not. So first, are there terrestrial transparency examples out there? If we rule out the glass frog, but second of all, and perhaps more interestingly, who else is using edge diffusion?
Yeah.
I feel like there's fish that do this.
Yes, they're the fish. They're
But terrestrial
zebrafish. Yes.
is the question.
Yeah.
Who does it
I
on
hear
land?
you.
Yeah.
It's translucent insect wings count.
Yeah, so there are definitely very
insects.
light colored spiders that you
Yeah,
can kind of see through them a little, but they're not invisible.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good question.
I'm now looking it up. I'm trying to find out.
Transparent animals on land. Well, while you're looking that up, I'll transition to my next story, which is actually a follow-up from a story I've did a very long time ago about competition for mates amongst siblings. So I don't know how long ago this was, but I brought a story about fruit flies. It has since been repeated with red jungle fowl, and it showed that males competing to mate with a female show less aggression when they're related to each other. And that's unusual because usually the more aggressive male is more likely to mate. So you would think that everybody would be aggressive no matter what because they'd want to succeed. But this is all based on this idea of the selfish gene, where basically because those two males are related, either of them winning and getting to mate is a success for their DNA. So if they can get any of their genetic material passed on, that's a success. So they don't want to kill each other trying to compete for a mate because then they both lose the opportunity to pass on that DNA. However, if the competitor is unrelated, they don't carry the same DNA, the male is more likely to do everything possible to mate, which means fighting as hard as he possibly can, even if he harms or potentially kills the female in the process.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
it's worth the risk, ultimately. It's the DNA talking, not me. It's the DNA. So
The DNA says I can.
Yes.
Oh, never mind.
So that's the previous study. Okay. Now this is a new study from University of St. Andrews, the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse, and the University of Valencia. And this is showing something pretty interesting, which is that through mathematical modeling, this is what they call kin discrimination, this kind of reducing how hard you're fighting if you're fighting against a sibling. It actually creates more aggression overall in males because their number of opportunities are reduced. So the stakes when they finally do let loose and fight as hard as they can are highest. So they actually compete harder. Their aggression is increased, and the likelihood of hurting each other or the female is increased. So even though you might think at first it would be better to be competing with relatives for mates because in that moment the competition is less fierce, in this case, in the long run, it's worse for everybody.
Wait, that wasn't that was not the punchline I was expecting. Worse for everybody.
Worse for everybody. So one of the lead researchers said, quote, although males who are competing against brothers will ramp down their harming behavior, a male who is able to tell that he is competing against non-relatives will then ramp up his harming behavior. And overall, this means that there is an increase in the amount of harming in the population as a whole, compared to with what would happen if males weren't able to tell who their brother is and who is not. So in this case, being able to recognize your kin actually is worse for the population in the long run. And in this case, I would say definitely the female. Because when you're fighting harder for access to the female is more likely to be injured.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wild. There's no winning if you're the woman on the side of this is the problem.
And that's why we say for this reason, as one of many, but this reason is a great reason for us to be human and not ducks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the image attached to this is quite rough. It's a harsh reality that, you know, we've talked about it a lot, that the sperm is cheap and eggs are very expensive, and so the name of the game for most males are to mate with as many females as possible, and so that can create some very interesting dynamics. And you would think that if you were surrounded by loved ones and you would therefore not fight as hard, that would be a good thing. But it's better to not know who you're related to in the mating game, turns out.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think overall, though, beyond kin discrimination, when we're talking about the passing genetic mutations on potentially recessive diseases that come with things like incest, it's good to know
Right.
who you're related to. And it's
Right,
good
and
to,
there's-
but in terms of, and
Yeah.
that's a different trade-off. Right.
Yeah, and that's a totally different recognition system too. And
Yeah.
and there's internal stuff that happen there too. Sometimes if DNA is not compatible between a male and a female, that they'll have trouble conceiving. So
Right.
there's lots of things that hopefully would help with that. But yeah, this is more of the just not wanting
The bros. The
to
bros.
hurt each other if you're related.
Not knowing.
It's like, you go
yeah.
ahead, man. Your success is my success, bro.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, this story is bringing me a little bit down. And so I want to talk about some strong women.
Yeah.
I want to jump into the quick science news for the end of the show with a story about some strong women out.
Is it about me? No.
I don't know. Have you had your DNA sequenced to determine whether or not you have a Neanderthal gene that determines your progesterone receptors?
No.
No. Okay.
What?
What? Yes.
What?
In a study that is published this week out of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, researchers have determined, and this is published in Molecular Biology and Evolution, researchers have determined that approximately 1 in 3 European women have inherited the progesterone receptor that they have from Neanderthals. 29% of European women carry at least 1 copy of the Neanderthal receptor, and 3% have 2 copies. Researcher Hugo Zeeberg, who worked on this study, says the proportion of women who inherited this gene is about 10 times greater than for most Neanderthal gene variants.
Yeah.
These findings suggest
must
that
be a
it had
reason it's
that it was positively selected for. Yes. And so the progesterone receptor, what they think is going on is that the progesterone receptor from the Neanderthals allowed better fertility, so that the molecular analyses revealed that these women who have this receptor produce more progesterone receptors in their cells, which could then increase sensitivity to progesterone. So if you have more receptors, there's more little fingers out there to grab the progesterone that is circulating in the blood. And that progesterone can then increase protection against early miscarriages and bleeding. The study showed that women who have this Neanderthal variant tend to have fewer bleeds during.
So after all of our conversations of the potentiality of just being outbred by Neanderthals, does this mean that that maybe humans weren't going around outbreeding Neanderthals? I mean, they definitely had smaller social groups, but they had smaller social groups than we had after Neanderthals. I don't really know that they had much smaller social groups than we had before we encountered Neanderthal.
Yeah.
And sort of interesting, like there's always been this like, humans just outbred the Neanderthal.
But this
Maybe
led
it was
to,
combination.
if it was a mixing of Neanderthals and humans together, and then the progesterone receptors in humans allowed humans to survive
Current modern.
pregnancy, fewer miscarriages, actually survive pregnancy, bear more children, which the study showed that the women with these variant gave birth to more children than women without the variant. It's a very compelling story.
Well, and it makes sense, doesn't it? So Neanderthals had small pods of humans. They didn't. Their kids grew up quicker, but they also kept smaller groups, so they may have had less children. Much more important, evolutionarily, the forces that be. If you're not going to have a lot of children, they better make it.
Yeah,
They
they'd better
get
survive.
there. Yeah. Whereas, human children, you have them, you don't have them. There's more. There's always more humans. So yeah, it's sort of interesting how these two sort of different strategies, once they got mixed, there is a successful hybrid of the two that's going to sort of outcompete and stick around. I mean, it's a pretty amazing number for how many people have this, for how small the overall percentage of Neanderthal DNA is in even the most Neanderthal human today.
Right. It's small. Yeah, it's like 2%, I think. It's a very small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in the average person.
The average,
and
yes.
yeah, but for Europeans, there's a higher percentage, of course, but this is like far and above most genetic variants that from Neanderthals that have persisted in humanity. And so this is
why the
really
rest have
interesting.
persisted, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, there's linking, all the chromosomal linking and all that kind of stuff. But it's good. Also, another study this week, we've asked many, many times, where's all the matter in the universe, right? The normal matter, the stuff, baryonic matter. We know that there's a lot of stuff that we can't see and that we don't know where it is. The dark matter, the dark energy, that stuff, that's not what this study is about. I'm talking about regular matter, the stuff that makes us up. Well, we're missing a large percentage of that. We've been missing a significantly huge amount for years.
Quick question. The real matter, the regular matter, the normal matter that we call it, which is like 4% of what makes up the universe, we've been missing most of that 4%.
Yes.
It's using edge diffusion. That's why
It's using edge diffusion.
We don't even have all the whole 4%.
Yeah, that's an estimate. It's an estimate. And actually, Blair, it is using some amount of diffusion.
There's another example, Blair.
Yes. So a few years back, there was a study that suggested that, it might be in these wispy tendrils, the web, the cosmic web that holds everything together in between the galaxies in the universe. But there hasn't really been any proof of that until now. Researchers at Curtin University, working with the International Center for Radio Astronomy Research, they looked at fast radio bursts from other galaxies and then looked at the way the frequencies of these radio bursts reached Earth, and were able to look at the distribution of the frequencies. And they assumed that if the light, the electromagnetic radiation coming from these fast radio bursts, if it interacted with any matter between where it was emitted and Earth, then that would slow it down and disperse, kind of like making a smear on a piece of paper, or the way that sunlight can get separated in a prism, that it might get spread out a little bit. And so they looked at this smear of frequencies, and pretty much from looking at 5 fast radio bursts from different places, different galaxies, and doing these estimations, they say they have found all of the missing baryonic matter in the universe. And it comes up to about 5%.
Oh, we have moved up in the universe.
We've moved up, yes.
Not by
Thanks,
a small amount.
Smear.
Thanks, frequency smear. But this definitely needs more samples. 5 fast radio bursts is not a lot to be estimating from, and so they're hoping that they'll be able to use some other methods and also additional observations to be able to really nail this down and figure out if indeed it works. But the idea that they had about matter slowing things down and it worked, and they have an estimate, and it's kind of neat. And so this is our evidence that yes, that's where the matter is hiding. It's diffuse, and it's just out there. And their estimates are that there is 1 atom of baryonic matter per square meter in the universe. That's the average.
It's
I
just
think
like
the
the
takeaway
weakest
is-
coffee you've ever tasted.
Super
It's like
weak.
so
Yes.
weak.
Very weak.
And oddly, this study was sponsored by the Gynecological Consortium, which reminds you,
What?
frequent smears matter more than you think.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Justin.
Sorry, I had to. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I'm going to run through my last 2 stories really quickly.
for
Stretchy words are on the rise. Thanks to social media, words that used to have vocalization are starting to encroach into the written word more than they ever have before. It's a trend that has been noticed by some researchers who publish in PLOS One. Things like dude hasn't been completely removed from vocabulary, but it is now showing up in print in ways it never had before. The stretching of the words can also have different meanings. This is Tyler Gray and some colleagues at the University of Vermont in Burlington who presented these in the open access journal PLOS One. They're looking at things like the different ways in which stretchy words are used and how context in a stretchy word is sort of tied to that word. So if I say yes,
No,
That's it.
Justin, you're saying yourself is yas.
that's another spelling. But that way, that's excitement. Yes. But
Yeah.
if you take the same different word and you take the word sure,
Yes.
if you take the word sure and stretch it, what happens?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sarcasm.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So the way in which a word is stretched either augments or emphasizes the meaning of the word, or it changes the meaning of the word. So there's this whole other thing that they're putting out there about how stretchy words influence language. It's sort of like an accent upon, or an inflection upon a word.
My favorite
I
one
know it
that I
includes some
use
tonality.
very often is STAHP.
Stop.
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 Stop. So good.
It's a good
Team
one.
of University of Rhode Island scientists and statisticians, they went back and did a really thorough look at the mass extinction event that occurred 250 million years ago, which has been debated. There was an asteroid that hit Canada that has like a 750 square mile lake where the impact took place. So that obviously killed off the dinosaurs of the day. Of course, there was also this massive heat wave thing that took place. Global warming thing was taking place. This climate change that definitely also killed. So but according to the research, it was neither. Actually, neither. Many of the dinosaurs, if you go back and you grab all the statistics and you look at where things were found and you look at the soil samples and you do the deep dive into it, majority of the dinosaurs were going extinct before the asteroid hit. And, you're talking about something that's a couple 100 million years away. So when this was first looked at, things might have seemed like they were overlapping and they're pretty close on top of each other. But there's a host of dinosaurs that there's no evidence of existing 6 million years. 6 million years is a long time. A lot can happen. 6 million years before the asteroid. There are some that survived the asteroid and died before the global warming event or the global climate change event, and there's some that made it after it. So what they said is it looks like a lot of the big species that they had tagged as extinct by these events became extinct at very different times, separated by sometimes tens of millions of years. So they don't posit an explanation for the extinction of many of these lineages that they looked at. But what they are saying is they don't seem to be associated with this asteroid event or with this climate change event that took place at that time. There were a lot of extinctions taking place, maybe for very different reasons. Some could have been associated with, but a lot of the big species they looked at, they were separated by time by too much to actually now be associated with those events.
Yeah.
So there might not have even been a mass extinction. It just might.
Right.
Life
Just
was
a spread
hard.
a
was
spread
just
out
hard.
extinction. It was hard, and it was an edge diffusion of extinction.
Life is just hard. And you're talking over millions of years too, which
Yeah.
that's all humans have. We have a few
Yeah.
million years. We don't have
Right.
more
When
than
you
that.
when you think about it, where are we going to sit on the evolutionary record when somebody of years from now looks back and we're like a blip? We'll be a blip compared to
No,
dinosaurs.
we'll be a max.
Yeah.
We'll be the pinpoint. We'll be the absolute cause of mass extinction for a lot of species. We won't be. We'll be the asteroid that did hit and did
Yes.
it the 65 million year ago when it hit at the right angle to take out as many life forms. So that's what we'll be. That's all distinction. We'll be noticed. Some cephalopods in the future will be like, oh yeah, the humans.
Yeah. I think the assumption that this 215, 220 year old
250.
extinction, 215, that it wasn't an extinction. It was millions of
Doesn't look
years
like
of things dying. I mean,
Yeah.
climate change as we consider it has only been ongoing for about a little more than 100 years. So this is
And really, the accelerated, the impactful stuff has been 40 or 50. Oh, well,
Mhm.
50, yeah, 60. It's been a while. Yeah, you're right.
right.
Almost getting there.
It is.
It's been a while. We've been reporting this for a while. It
have been.
wasn't 100 years when we started, but it might be now.
Well done, people. Yeah, so compare that to millions of years. Yeah.
Time scales. People don't understand. Like
Timescales.
the whole
Very
point
different.
of like we've been there before. Yeah, technically, but every life form had 5-10 million years to adjust to things, maybe to get to these extremes of heat.
Yep. Hey, Blair, what's your last story?
This is a fun story about geophysicists working in the Greenland fjords. They had been
Fjords.
working there for several years. They were studying the sounds that are made by melting glaciers. Turns out those sounds are pretty cool. It's just basically a bunch of cracking from ice fracturing, bubbles melting. They say it's like fizzy drink underwater. And after a few years of doing that, coincidentally, a population of narwhals started summering in those fjords. And one of the researchers said, quote, "I realized working in the area and not paying attention to the elephant in the room, the key endemic legendary Arctic unicorn just flowing around our glacier, was a big mistake." So, with the help of Inuit hunters,
Wow.
they were
That
able to
fast clicking is
record
them?
various calls, buzzes, clicks, and whistles of narwhals.
That's at least 180 beats per minute.
It sounds like a frog.
It does! Narwhals are notoriously difficult to study because they are shy.
Sorry about that.
They're shy, they are skittish, and they spend most of their time deep in the freezing Arctic Ocean. So they're really, really hard to capture. Plus, when people put underwater microphones down attached to small boats, the narwhals just, they leave. They can't really get very close. So they actually used the knowledge of the Inuit hunters in the area to figure out how to get close to them. So these hunters were very familiar with the cetaceans, and so they were able to go on a hunting expedition, get up really close to those narwhals, and use their same underwater microphones that they were using to capture the sound of the ice, to capture these first sounds of narwhals.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Being able
But
to
that
hear
clicking, that was really fast clicking. That was going
Yeah.
on. That was really incredible.
that, I wonder if that vocalization is like echolocation from a bat.
It could, so It could be, and that is one of the theories of what a narwhal tooth might be for. It's about echolocation. Most likely it's not. Most likely it has to do with sexual selection and competition, probably. Also, there's a theory that it could have to do with
Could be
electromagnetic reception.
Right. Which is why they don't like the microphones. No.
It's we don't know. We don't know why they have this giant tooth, but yeah, it could be related to sound. And if that's not the main reason, we know that other cetaceans use their mandible to channel sound through, like, belugas use their big melon on the top of their head, it's called, and they use their jawbone to help channel that, and so do dolphins. So it would make sense if one of your teeth connected to that jaw is sticking out, that it's going to help conduct sound, even if that's not the main reason that they developed it. So
I feel like we covered the thing where they could taste with that tooth too.
Maybe it was chemoreception, something like that.
Yeah, I think there might have been.
So, all-purpose unicorn horn tooth.
Yeah. I don't know, but anyway, we know a little bit more about them. We know what they sound like, and then we also know a couple things about their behavior that we didn't know before. They get way closer to the glacier ice than they thought that they did. And they got to watch some of them do foraging behaviors, which they haven't really observed a whole lot before. So, yeah, I'm learning more about the unicorns of the sea.
Yeah, and it's great. The cooperation between locals with indigenous knowledge and understanding of the animals and the scientists allows the scientists to do more, and hopefully to do it in a way that's respectful and helps the community also. So, like, all of it hopefully becomes a wonderful synergy.
You mean they caught and ate one of the narwhals at the end of this?
No,
is that what you're saying?
That's
what the communities do. That's what the communities there do.
Honoring local knowledge is really important. Good. That was the oxpecker story from a few weeks ago was directly related to that as well. So it's really a moment for scientists to remember to kind of like leave all of their preconceptions at the door and meet people that live alongside these animals where they are first and learn from them, and then combine those two things together, I think, is the really great opportunity.
Yeah. A very great opportunity. And I think we've come to the end of our show. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. We have done it, everyone. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please share it with a friend. Special thanks to our guest tonight, Dr. Jenny Tung. We will have links to her website and to her social media on the TWIS webpage, the episode podcast page. I'd also like to shout out my thanks to people who help with the show. Thank you, Fada, for your help with social media and show notes. Gord, thank you for manning the chat room. And ID4 for recording the show. Thank you so much. Also, I'd like to thank the Burroughs Welcome Fund and our Patreon sponsors for their generous support. Thank you to Paul Disney, Andrew Swanson, Stu Pollock, Ed Dyer, Ken Hayes, Craig Landon, Tony Steele, Alex Wilson, Steve DeBell, Joshua Fury, Philip Shane, Ed Loves Science, Mark Mazzaros, Richard Porter, Sky Luke, Brian Condren, Richard, Eric Knapp, Bill K, Jason Roberts, Matthew Litwin, Jack, Bob Calder, Dave Neighbor, E.O., Kevin Parachan, Matt Sutter, Aaron Luthen, Flying Out, Christopher Rappin, Brendan Minish, Greg Briggs, Robert, Gary S., Marjorie, Rudy Garcia, Kurt Larson, Steve Leisman, Sean Lamb, Greg Riley, Jim Drapeau, Lisa Sluzewski, Christopher Dreyer, Brian Carrington, Jason Olds, John McKee, Paul Artyom, Ulysses Adkins, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Dave Wilkinson, Sue Doster, Paul Ronovich, Daryl Myshak, Dave Friedel, John Ratnaswamy, Steve Albaran, Seth O'Gradney, Mountain Sloth, Rodney Lewis, Sarah Chavis, Corinne Benton, John Gridley, Jean Tellier, Patrick Pecoraro, Darwin Hannon, Matt Bay, Stan K, Sarah Forfar, Donald Mundis, Howard Tan, Josiah Zahner, Taylor P.S., Ben Bignell, Maddie Perrin, Ashley Doyle, Mark Hessenflow, John Atwood, Ali Coffin, Ben Rothig, and John Lee. Thank you for your support on Patreon. And if you are interested in more information, you can visit patreon.com/thisweekinscience. On next week's show,
we will be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time, that is, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook dens. And from TWIS.org / or / one of them, I still haven't ever figured out, live, for you to join in and listen.
I think it's a forward /
Is that a forward? Just have one. It's so pointless having two. I don't understand.
Want to listen to us as a podcast? Please search for This Week in Science wherever your podcasts like to be found. If you enjoyed the show, you can also get your friends to subscribe as well.
Yes, for more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to the stories that we are mentioning will be available on our website, which is www.twis.org, which you can also / and hit live when it's time for another live show, and you can tune in then. And you can also sign up for our newsletter.
That's right. Hey, do you want to talk to us directly? Holler at us. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com. Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twist.org. Somebody sent me a lovely email about buying masks. It was very cute. Just put TWIS, TWIS, in the subject line, or your email. It's going to get spam filtered into oblivion.
Yeah. You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jackson Planet, Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you in the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you have learned anything from this show, remember,
It's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. Jeopardy. And This Week in Science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say, and if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science.
Science.
Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. Science. Science.
Roadrunner.
I've got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch
lizard
Ness.
stink thing.
I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. 'Cause
It's This Week in
Is that
Science.
a giraffe
This
beetle?
Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.
And that is the end of the show. You're doing arts.
I am.
New
This
calendar
is a giraffe
artsing.
weevil. You were so close.
Oh, I was so close. Giraffe
You were
weevil.
so close. I was like, she's not gonna know what this is.
Is it like it's a
You
giraffe
were
beetle?
so close. Yeah, axolotl. This is a blue tongue skink, but you wouldn't know that because I haven't colored
You
your
can't
tongue yet.
color its tongue. I knew it was skinky.
Yeah,
It
the
looked
tiny
pretty
legs.
Skinky.
They did you
Yeah.
away. Yes, roadrunner, sturgeon, lemur.
Thank you everyone for watching. Oh, I'm yawning.
This is a
Sturgeon
Panamanian
lemur.
golden frog.
Ooh.
It's a frog that was thought extinct for a very long time.
I will see about Justin putting the story in the run sheet, Fada. I don't have it either, so I don't know. I can go look for it. I don't know what he did. That's funny. Brian Burwell says the music sounds so different when played at the intended speed.
Oh, that's very funny.
Yes, that's what you get for listening to us live. The music played at the intended speed as opposed to pitch shifted when you make it go faster. Do you listen to us at 1.5 time? 2 time? Some people listen to our show at 3 times speed, which I don't know if I could handle.
I can imagine what that must be like. That must be absolutely. I can't even.
You can't even do it.
I can't. It's too late. I can't talk. Can't even think of words to say.
You can't talk fast. Can't talk that fast.
It's too late.
I have a dessert that my child made. Well, I helped him make it, but it was all his thinkings.
That's great.
It's whipped cream. We were limited on. He wanted to make a cake, and we were limited on what we could make because of ingredients. We didn't have any vanilla, but we ended up making this Italian sponge cake, fresh whipped cream, and chocolate dipped strawberries. That was his.
That's so fun.
Oh, and I think there's also a chocolate drizzle on the cake under the whipped cream. He's a regular little baker. This one.
Neat.
Fancy stuff, and it also gave us time to work on adding ratios.
Oh, smart.
Yes.
I use that all the time when baking. Like, I'm doubling this recipe. It asks for 4 tablespoons. But how many tablespoons are in a cup? I don't know.
Right. Yes. I know that there are 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon. I think that's
1.3
1.3
cup. Other way.
3 tablespoons
Okay, suddenly
to
everybody's Googling.
3
16.
tablespoons, 16 tablespoons to a cup.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wouldn't have known that. 1.3 times. Yes. Exactly. It's not just doubled. That's an interesting choice. Gaurav Sharma wants to know why the tongues of skinks are blue, Blair.
Oh, well, they're trying to scare off potential predators. So, bright colors usually mean poison or venom. And in this case, it's probably related to the fact that they live where a poisonous adder, a type of snake, is that has blue on their body. And so they open up their mouth really big and stick their tongue out wide. Basically be like, stay away, I'm dangerous. I'm really
Yeah.
They're not at all.
Skinks are not dangerous. I mean, you don't want to get bitten
fib.
by a skink, but they're
No.
not dangerous.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, they're not venomous or poisonous. It's fine.
They're cute. Skinks are
Seems
cute.
like one of the animals that you can always pet at like a zoo somewhere.
Yeah, they're pretty mild.
They're always
mannered
bringing out the
little
skinks
buddies.
for yeah.
Yeah.
Night, Fada.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also they're like, I love everything. Like they have a shovel-shaped head because they dig with their head, and they have teeny tiny little arms because their arms just get in the way when they dig with their head. So over, evolutionary time, the eggs have gotten smaller and smaller so they could just tuck them by their side while they dig. So they're basically like a legless lizard while they're digging. That's great. I love it.
Get in there. Gotta get in
And
there.
skinks in captivity, when you give them like dirt to live in and stuff, a lot of the time you'll come in and they'll be napping with a big pile of dirt on their head because they will have like nestled into the dirt just right, and their head is fully out of the dirt, but they just have a little dirt hat. It's so good. I love it.
Oh, little skink, I love your dirt hat.
So good. They're
It's-
pure. They're pure little souls.
Blair, you can't yawn.
You yawned. I know. How's your sleep this week, Justin? Better?
No. No.
I thought you're done with your.
I got woken up a couple nights ago by a
Rooster. Oh,
Yeah.
Rooster? Yeah. A
Um,
what? A dingo.
No. It sounded like I thought it. Okay, so in my dream state, I was trying to figure out why there were hyenas
coyotes,
at the farm.
Coyotes.
They were
yes, that
coyotes,
sounds
and they
like
were
it.
making this amazing, but mixed with a little bit of bark and a little bit of
Yeah.
howl, but a lot of that yip 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 yip, yip like they, and it sounded like hyena sound, kind of. It was really strange, yeah. And I don't know how many there were because it was very dark out, but it sounded like there was 100 of them.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was very loud. Yeah.
Fun fact about coyotes, I think I shared this when I learned it last spring. They only have a dominant male and female in any specific territory. And if you hear or see more than 2 coyotes, it's usually their babies. So they have them until they're like a year old. They'll keep some of them a little extra long to help them raise their pups. But an
So it was
adult
likely
male
a
and
family.
female only in a specific space. That's
Okay.
it. And so
Yeah,
if
that
you
was
think,
definitely more than 2.
like
It
people
was a
think,
bunch.
people think when they go to the Presidio in San Francisco that they've seen like 10 coyotes. They've seen 2. You just move around a lot.
Over and over again.
You just see the same coyotes over and over again.
Although, some friends of mine were hiking in the Bay Area in San Francisco. I forget where they were, but they were on a trail, and apparently some coyotes came off the trail and like grabbed they were with a child, and it was like a couple of adult women and a child. Yeah, and the coyote grabbed the child's jacket and tried to pull the child off the trail.
So probably they were very, 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 very close to a den. Is what that means.
maybe. Mm-hmm.
Because that's like the only reason coyotes will do that is they think that, dogs. That's why dogs are so at risk during coyote whelping season, because like they're like they think that they're potentially a threat on their den.
Oh, Hank wants to know what Justin's shirt says. People assume that time is a strict progression of cause and effect, but it's
A big ball of wibbly wobbly,
actually,
timey wibbly
from a
stuff.
non-subjective perspective. It's a Doctor Who quote from
Doctor Who.
my favorite, one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who, Blink.
I love
Is I think my favorite episode of Doctor Who ever. It's awesome. It was raining when we met. It was the same rain. Oh, I get chills just thinking about that episode.
Identity 4 is getting attacked by crows in his yard. They're mad about
Sharma-
something. Oh.
Sharma, it says it is so hot in the Bay Area. It is really affecting my sleep schedule. Okay.
It's like 100
I
degrees
heard the
in
weather
Davis,
report.
right? Yeah.
No. That was a few days ago when it was just warming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that day when it was like 104, and it's like, yeah, Vacaville was 103 today, Woodlands 105, Davis is 104, and the Bay Area is 78 degrees.
And people are, you know what? Do you know what happened? I still get SF alerts to my cell phone and to my
very funny.
email. And so I was alerted. I got an email from the Bay Area, from the city of San Francisco, warning people that they would need to be, drinking water and to beware of the coming high temperatures.
Yeah, and
Well,
it is okay, but this is a great example,
San
though.
Francisco.
This is a
With
great example of
preparation.
global warming, though. This happens once in a while to New York City, where they have a heat wave and people die because it gets to be 85 degrees over a few days.
Mm-hmm.
If nobody has an air conditioner, that heat becomes unmanageable. You know, it could be 104 in Davis, but everybody has air conditioning cranked up to knock it down to 68 degrees. If you live in a place where you've never had to turn on an air conditioner, so why invest in one, and you don't have one, and it gets into the upper 80s, and you don't have a mitigation strategy. So yeah, there's it's relative, but it's a great example of what the problem of global warming is. This is exactly it. There are ecosystems and biomes that don't have mitigations to a temperature increase, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal to you. To that particular community within this biome, that is game changing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the Bay Area, at least, I think we're done. It's going to be like mid 60s for the next 10 days. So
It's supposed
I
to. The
think we got
Central
through
Valley is
the-
supposed to be done too.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still keep an eye on California's
You're
weather.
in Alameda. Yeah. Sharma says, I think my house is 110 degrees indoors. My landlord says Alameda did not need air conditioners back in the day, which was a long time ago. Back in the day, you could be talking about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There was a thing where people who lived in the Bay Area or even Napa area, just west of the Central Valley, would buy cars that did not have air conditioners. And they would build cars and that they would only send to the coastal California that didn't have air conditioners because nobody wanted to pay extra.
My college car didn't have an air conditioner.
At some point, the auto industry.
My family just didn't have a lot of money growing up in the Central Valley, so we didn't have air conditioning. So we had what we called 460. We had 460. Yeah, we had 460 air conditioning.
4 windows down, go 60 miles an hour to pull the car down.
Yeah.
Perfect.
These sorts of things have been changing oddly.
When I started dating Brian, he lived in Palo Alto, and his apartment did not have air conditioning.
Yeah.
So
it was the old normal.
Hot. Got very hot.
Noodles raises a hand from a New York City apartment. Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I moved to Sonoma County for college, I bought my first ever fan.
First ever.
Had never used a fan in a house before.
Because it got to the high 70s in Sonoma.
No, it got to 108, actually.
Did it? Oh.
Yes. So
a fan does nothing.
May, June, it would get over 100 degrees. Yeah. So, but I had never had to go buy a fan before because I grew up in San Francisco and it never got hot. I tried to explain to people that when I used to work summer camp when I was in college, I would wear I would wear a scarf and fingerless gloves during summer camp in San Francisco. That's what summer was in San Francisco. It was socked in fog. It was freezing. And, now the beaches are full. And I'm like, you would go to Ocean Beach to lay out? What? Do you think this is Southern California? What is this? But it's the right temperature for it now. It's crazy. I have summer clothes. I've never had summer clothes before. Living in the Bay Area. That's like, it's very weird having seasons now. That's like a thing I would go to other places to experience seasons. And I'd come back to San Francisco where it was always the same.
But now San Francisco is getting more seasons. But it's still cold in the summer more often than not. At least the fog comes in, and I mean we still got that. So the last couple of
the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. That's a great quote.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So true. You suffer through it. Yeah, some places you just got to suffer through. So speaking of not necessarily suffering, we have our new TWIS face masks.
Yay!
They've
there's
gone
the
live.
mammoth one.
They've gone live on the TWIS
by Justin's request. There's the mammoth.
marketplace. We have a mammoth.
Nice.
We have the
turtle.
turtle, which is cute, folded and then unfolded. I like the turtle for that. Folded, not folded. Which one do I want? Then you've got the standard TWIS. Oop, I can get 20% off my order. I like this one. It's very...
It's pretty loud.
It's very loud. I like it. TWIS!
I think
In your face! It's in your face! TWIS! I still want this hoodie.
Yeah, I want that hoodie too.
Hello, hoodie. Yeah, we should all have that hoodie. We should all
Great.
have that hoodie and wear it.
Was that our coronavirus present from TWIS?
Yeah, right. We should all have the hoodie, and then if we're ever allowed to be live in person again, we can all wear it.
Oh, that would be very fun.
Oh, Gaurav Sharma got the mammoth and the red panda mask. Awesome.
Nice.
Yay. HNEK likes them. Sweet. Yay. Sweet.
That's awesome.
Ed from Connecticut, you got the black one. Yay. Awesome. Sweet. I'm glad.
I've been,
Relevant products.
I wonder, Kiki, if you've heard the latest. I'm going to go ahead and ask.
I'm so in on all the latest,
The latest.
I'm so well connected. No. What?
Are we worried about petting dogs in relation to coronavirus? I'm trying to figure this out because previously dog parks were closed, and I thought that was because there was this concern that like you touch the dog, somebody else touches your dog, they got whatever was on your hand now on them. But I also wasn't sure if they closed just because they didn't want people congregating.
That's also it, because people were being not wearing masks.
But it's outdoors.
But it was like because a lot of other parks had already closed. There, people were just congregating in the dog parks, and the dog parks were really crowded. So they closed them because it was actually a health issue.
But this is a good point. The CDC has reversed a lot of their stances on the ability to contract through touch. They're now saying it's much more difficult to contract through touch than they initially thought, and that the aerosolized or the breathing air that can be standing in a space for hours after somebody's left who was contagious is a higher level of concern, which is why they're telling like everybody's getting mandatory. Like, I don't know, San Francisco sounds like it's doing something different now, but you cannot go into a business in Yolo County without having a mask on. There is no such directive whatsoever about gloves. They're still saying wash your hands, but there's no like
whenever I go anywhere.
Yeah. But there is no glove directive, but you have to have a face mask to go to a lot of places of work. Everybody who's working is wearing them. And if you are going into a grocery store, if you don't have a mask, like we said, there was like that thing where a guy went into Costco and didn't want to wear a mask, and they told him to take a hike. That's kind of how it is everywhere around here now.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the mask, but there isn't a big emphasis on the touch. They're almost saying that like the mass decontamination or spraying down of things between people using kiosk or whatever to keypad to pay for something is now considered perhaps more a confidence builder than it is actually a prevention technique in terms of its importance. But
I mean, okay. So
I say do everything.
I say yes.
Do everything.
Yes, manage your risks and going and petting other people's dogs. If you go, sanitize your hands afterwards, or wash your hands afterwards. Make sure you don't touch your face between petting the dogs, and and if you're going. If other people petting let other people pet your dogs, just wash your dog.
I know, that's the thing, right? Like, so I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I want
your dog is super cute and people want to pet her.
Aside from that, I want really bad to be able to give my parents some dog time. Really, really, really bad. But
yeah.
But I don't know if that is safe. So I could give her a bath right before we take her over there and use gloves, I guess, after that until we hand her off very antiseptically.
Yeah, you could totally
hang out with her for a bit.
Yeah, you could totally do that. You could absolutely do that. Yeah. And I mean, it's also how... Well, I guess because Brian goes out a lot. That's the big concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So, according to the CDC website, I just found it. It says.
Yeah, I know. They've changed it. They've changed their. Go ahead and read it. They've changed their thoughts. Yeah.
So right now it says, do not let pets interact with people or other animals outside of your household.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So it's helpful.
I mean, I think it's being in contact with, and so yeah, and a pet, if somebody coughs or sneezes in their hand, touches the animal, you've got instant transmission. People, if you're not washing your hands all the time, but you're playing with your animal and doing things, and because they've reduced their thoughts about surfaces being a main transmitter, and they haven't necessarily found a point where it's like, yes, we know somebody touched that box and it was transmitted. But there is still through contact and through close association.
Yeah. But then at the same time, like, they're not worried about nature play space, generally speaking. Like wood. It's like, it's in the sun and it's porous, so it's probably fine.
Concrete, yeah. Things that are outside in the sun. Yeah, the sun is probably disinfecting all of that. The UV is disinfecting all of it. So just leave your dog outside for a long time in the sun.
She'd love it.
Yeah. What?
All right. I think it's time to say goodnight, Blair.
Oh, you hit your end.
Good night, Blair.
Right, well,
good night, Justin.
You guys can keep going.
I just
keep going.
You hit your tired. You hit your tired end.
That works for me.
I started there. This is the only place I am anymore. And I've got 2 more days before I can sleep, so.
What?
Say goodnight, Blair.
Are we wait, are we going to see you next week? Do you have a schedule?
Yeah, I've got a few more weeks of knowing that you will see me.
Yes.
And then I don't know.
The future,
the
future is a mystery. Good night, Blair. Say good night, Justin.
It is a mystery.
Good night, Justin. Good night, Kiki.
Good night, everyone. I wish you well. Thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. We will see you again next week. More fun and more science, more conversation with friends. See you then.